The emergency signal came through at 0347 hours, cutting through the quiet hum of the bridge like a knife. Captain Jake Morrison was already awake, drinking his third cup of coffee while reviewing patrol reports. Sleep had never come easy to him, not since the war on Mars ended 3 years ago. "Captain, we're picking up a distress call." Lieutenant Lisa Park called out from the communications station. Her voice was calm, but Morrison could hear the tension underneath. Park had been with him since the beginning, and she knew the sound of real trouble. Morrison set down his coffee and walked over to her station. The Defiant was humanity's first real starship, not just a transport or mining vessel. She was built for war, even though the politicians back on Earth called her an exploration and defense platform. Everyone on board knew better. "Hey, what do we have, Park?" She pulled up the signal on her screen. The audio was scratchy, full of static, but the desperation came through clearly. It was in a language Morrison didn't recognize, but the universal translator was working overtime. "Please, anyone who can hear this message, the Kreth have found us. They're destroying our cities. Our people are dying. The children." "Oh God. The children? We have maybe days before we are all gone." "This is Zalari Prime. Galactic coordinates 7-7-Mark-4-9. Please, if anyone is listening, we need help. The Federation Council says they cannot spare ships. They say the risk is too high, but we are dying. Someone has to help us." The message repeated, growing weaker each time as the signal degraded. Morrison stood silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Around the bridge, his crew waited for orders. They all knew that look on their captain's face. "Where's the nearest Federation ship?" Morrison asked. Park checked her console. "The Vorthok vessel Harmony of Stars is about 6 hours away at maximum warp. They're heading away from the Zalari system." Morrison wasn't surprised. The Vorthok were one of the oldest members of the Galactic Federation. They were crystal beings who thought in centuries instead of minutes. They probably spent more time debating whether to respond than the Zalari had left to live. "Get me the Federation emergency channel," Morrison ordered. A few seconds later, the familiar, crystalline face of Ambassador Zenthka appeared on the main screen. The Vorthok looked tired, which was unusual for a species that didn't technically need sleep. "Captain Morrison, I assume you have intercepted the Zalari distress signal." "I have." "What's the Federation's response?" Zenthka's crystal form shifted, colors showing discomfort. "The Council has reviewed the situation. The Kreth Dominion has over 200 warships in that system. The risk to our forces would be too great. We cannot justify losing multiple Federation vessels to save one world." Morrison felt his temper rising. "So you're just going to let them die?" "Captain, you must understand. The Kreth are not like other species. They do not take prisoners. They do not show mercy. They have been expanding their territory for 1,000 years, and no one has ever successfully opposed them. To send ships against them would be suicide. Have you told the Zalari that?" The ambassador's colors shifted again. "We have informed them that military assistance is not possible at this time. We are preparing refugee ships to evacuate any survivors after the Kreth move on." Morrison stared at the screen for a long moment. Around him, his crew was listening to every word. He could see the anger in their faces. These were people who had fought in Earth's bloodiest wars, who had lost friends and family to human monsters. The idea of abandoning innocent civilians, 2 alien ones, made them sick. "Thank you for the briefing, Ambassador." Morrison out. The screen went dark. Morrison turned to face his crew. They were all looking at him with the same expression. They knew what he was thinking, and they were with him. "How long to reach the Zalari system at maximum warp?" he asked. Commander Tony Blake, his pilot, checked the navigation console. 73 hours, sir." "But Captain, the Defiant isn't designed to take on an entire fleet." "What?" "We've got good weapons and armor, but not against those odds." Morrison nodded. Blake was right, of course. The Defiant was tough, but she was just one ship. The smart thing would be to report the situation to Earth Command and let them decide. By the time a proper fleet could be assembled and sent, the Zalari would be extinct. but at least they would follow proper military procedure. Dr. Amy Stone spoke up from the medical station. "Captain, I've been reading about the Zalari. They're complete pacifists. They don't even have weapons. Their entire civilization is built around art and music and healing. They've never hurt anyone." "I know, Doc." Sergeant Rick Hayes turned from the weapons console. "Sir, if we don't help them, no one will. The Federation is too scared, and Earth doesn't even know they exist yet." Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew. These weren't politicians or diplomats. They were soldiers. They had all volunteered for this mission, knowing they might never see Earth again. They had signed up to explore strange new worlds and keep humanity safe. But right now, humanity wasn't in danger. The Zalari were. "Park, open a channel to the Zalari system." "Sir, it might not get through. The Kreth are probably jamming communications." "Try." And anyway, a few minutes later, Park nodded. "I've got something, Captain. Very weak signal. Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was different from the distress message. Younger, more afraid. "This is Healer Yanni of the Zalari Medical Council. Is someone there? Please, if you can hear me, we need help. The Kreth ships are everywhere. They're bombing the cities. We have children hiding in the caves, but they're using ground-penetrating weapons to find them. How can anyone be so cruel?" Morrison picked up the microphone. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earthship Defiant. We received your distress call. Help is coming."
Oh.
There was silence for a long moment. Then the voice came back, filled with disbelief. "Earth, you're the new species, aren't you? The ones from the violent world. But your planet is so far away. Why would you help us?" Morrison thought about that question. Why were they doing this? Earth wasn't even officially part of the Federation. Yet, they had no treaty obligations to the Zalari. No shared history or common interests. A smart political move would be to stay out of it. "'Cause someone asked for help," he said finally. "And we heard you." He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. "All right, people. You heard the situation. The Kreth have over 200 ships. We have one. The Federation thinks we're crazy, and they're probably right. Anyone who wants to transfer off at the next starbase can do so with no questions asked." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Morrison wasn't surprised. "Hayes, I want every weapon system checked and rechecked. Blake, plot a course for the Zalari system, maximum warp. Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them what we're doing and why. Stone, start preparing the medical bay. We're probably going to need it." His crew jumped to their duties with the efficiency of people who had trained together for years. Morrison settled into his captain's chair and watched the stars streak past as the Defiant jumped to warp speed. In 73 hours, they would reach the Zalari system. They would face an enemy that had never been defeated, with odds that would make any sane military commander surrender before the first shot was fired. The Federation had already written the Zalari off as a lost cause, but the Federation didn't understand humans. They saw Earth as a violent, dangerous world that had produced a species barely civilized enough for galactic society. They were right. Of course, Earth was violent. Humans were dangerous. But sometimes, that's exactly what the galaxy needed. The first day of travel passed quietly. Morrison had ordered his crew to rotate shifts and get rest while they could. In 60 hours, they would need to be at their best. The bridge was dimmed a night cycle, but Morrison knew most of his people weren't sleeping. They were doing what soldiers always did before a big fight. They were preparing. Lieutenant Park was in the weapons bay checking every missile and energy cell personally. She had already run 3 full diagnostics on the targeting systems. Morrison found her there at 0200, sitting on the floor surrounded by disassembled parts. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She looked up from the plasma coil she was cleaning. "Did you know the Kreth have been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years? I've been reading everything we have on them. They don't just attack military targets. They hunt civilians for sport." Morrison sat down beside her. The weapons bay was quiet, except for the hum of the ship's engines. "What else did you learn?" "They believe that mercy makes you weak. They think peaceful species deserve to be destroyed, because they won't fight back. Every world they've taken, they've killed every living thing on it. Plants, animals, everything. Park picked up another component and started working on it with nervous energy. Federation species are all terrified of them. Even their military forces run away instead of fighting. Are you having second thoughts about this mission? Park laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sir, I grew up in Detroit during the gang wars. My little brother was killed by a drug dealer when he was 8 years old, just caught in crossfire while walking to school. You think I'm going to let alien bullies kill children when I can do something about it? Morrison nodded. It read. Park's file. She had joined the military the day after her brother's funeral and had never looked back. Some people became soldiers for glory or adventure. Others did it because someone had to stand between the monsters and the innocent people. He found Sergeant Hayes in the engineering section, working on something that definitely wasn't standard equipment. Hayes was hunched over a workbench, welding components together with intense focus. What are you building, Hayes? The sergeant looked up with a grin that would have worried a saner man. Surprise packages, Captain. The Kreth like to board disabled ships and hunt the crew for fun. I figured we should give them something to remember us by. Morrison looked at the devices Hayes was building. They looked like standard emergency beacons, but he could see the modifications. Are those what I think they are? Yep. Motion-activated charges with proximity fuses. Anyone comes looking for helpless humans, they're going to find something. Else entirely? Hayes held up one of the devices. I've got enough components to make about 50 of these. Should keep the boarding parties busy. Hayes had always been creative with explosives. During the Mars War, he had once taken out an entire enemy bunker complex using nothing but mining charges and kitchen timers. The enemy had expected conventional military tactics. They hadn't expected a farm boy from Kansas who treated demolitions like an art form. Dr. Stone was in the medical bay, preparing for casualties that would probably never make it to her table. Morrison found her organizing surgical supplies with the same methodical precision she used for everything else. I've got the bay set up for trauma surgery and emergency treatment. Burn gel, plasma, synthetic blood, bone regenerators. Everything I can think of. She paused in her inventory. Captain, I've been reading about Kreth physiology. They're tough, but they have weaknesses. Their nervous system runs along their spine, just like humans. A precise strike to the right spot will drop one permanently. Stone had been a battlefield medic before joining the Defiant. She had saved more lives than anyone could count, but she also knew exactly how to end them. When necessary, Morrison had seen her switch from healer to killer in seconds during the Mars campaign, and it had been terrifying to watch. Are you planning to do more than patch us up, Doc? Sir, I took an oath to do no harm. But that oath also says I have to protect the innocent. If some alien monster is trying to kill children, I'm going to stop it any way I can. Commander Blake was on the bridge, running flight simulations against impossible odds. Morrison watched him pilot the virtual Defiant through scenarios where they faced 50 enemy ships, then 100, then 200. In every simulation, the human ship was destroyed within minutes. Finding anything useful? Morrison asked. Blake looked up from his console. The Kreth fly in standard formation. Patterns. Very organized. Very predictable. They rely on overwhelming force instead of tactics. He brought up a tactical display. Their ships are heavily armed, but not very maneuverable. They're used to fighting enemies that run away or surrender quickly. What about their fighters? But simple. They're designed for strafing runs against ground targets, not dogfighting. I think I can outfly them, but there are going to be a lot of them. Blake adjusted the simulation parameters. Captain, if we're really doing this, we need to hit them hard and fast. Make them think we're something we're not. Morrison studied the tactical display. 200 Kreth ships against one human vessel. Smart thing would be to turn around and go home. But none of his crew were suggesting that option. The second day brought visitors. The Federation had assigned observers to the Defiant to monitor human behavior and report back to the Council. Morrison had forgotten about them until Ambassador Zenthka's aide, a nervous Mindari named Telsoth, approached him on the bridge. Captain. Morrison, I must express the Federation's concern about your current course of action. The Mindari Collective has calculated the probability of success at less than 2%. Morrison didn't look up from his tactical reports. What's the probability of success if we don't try at all? That is not the point. You are risking not only your own lives, but potentially damaging relations between Earth and the Federation. If you are destroyed by the Kreth, it will be seen as proof that humans are too aggressive for civilized space. Lieutenant Park turned from her station. And if we save the Zalari? Telsoth's tentacles writhed with discomfort. It would be ... unexpected. No one has ever successfully opposed the Kreth in direct combat. Then maybe it's time someone tried, Morrison said. The Mindari observer retreated to the quarters that had been assigned to the Federation delegation. Morrison knew they were probably sending reports back to their home worlds about the crazy humans who were flying into certain death. Let them report whatever they wanted. Actions spoke louder than diplomatic messages. On the third day, they reached the edge of the Zalari system. The tactical sensors immediately began picking up energy. Signatures. Lots of them. Captain, I'm reading 237 Kreth vessels, Park reported. Various classes, from fighters to battlecruisers, they're in orbital positions around Zalari Prime. Morrison studied the tactical display. The Kreth fleet was spread out in a standard blockade formation, preventing any ships from escaping the planet. On the surface, he could see the energy signatures of ongoing bombardment. Any sign of Zalari ships? Negative, sir. Not detecting any active vessels of Zalari origin. There are some debris fields that might have been their fleet. Morrison nodded grimly. The Zalari were pacifists. They probably hadn't even tried to fight back. Their ships were likely destroyed in the first few minutes of the attack. Time to communication range? 30 minutes, sir? Morrison stood up and walked to the center of the bridge. His crew was at their stations, ready for whatever came next. The Federation observers were huddled in the corner, probably calculating their own chances of survival. All right, people. This is it. In 30 minutes, we're going to announce ourselves to the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. They're going to try to kill us, and they're probably going to succeed. Anyone want to change their mind? Nobody moved. Morrison wasn't surprised. Hazer, your surprise is ready? All 50 packages are armed and ready, Captain. Stone Medical. Bay. Ready for anything, sir? Blake, how's our flight path? We're going in, fast and loud. Park. Weapons. All systems green. We've got enough firepower to make them notice us. Morrison settled back into his captain's chair. In a few minutes, they would face an enemy that had never been defeated. The odds were impossible. The mission was probably suicidal. The Federation thought they were insane. But somewhere on the planet below, innocent people were dying while the galaxy's protectors debated and calculated risks. Morrison had made his choice the moment he heard that first distress call. Take us in, Blake. Time to show the galaxy what humans do when someone asks for help. The Defiant dropped out of warp at the edge of the Zalari system with all weapons powered and shields at maximum. Morrison could see the Kreth fleet spread across his tactical display like a disease. 237 ships, all focused on the dying world below. Captain, they've seen us, Park reported. The entire fleet is turning in our direction. Morrison opened a communication channel to the enemy fleet. His message was broadcast on all frequencies in every language the universal translator could manage. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Defiant. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system, or we will remove you ourselves. The response came back in heavily accented standard Galactic. The voice was deep and harsh, filled with amusement. Human vessel, this is War Leader Thax of the Kreth Dominion. You are one ship against our entire fleet. Surrender now, and we will make your deaths quick. Morrison smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. 30 seconds, Thax. Make your choice. The war leader's laughter echoed across the communication channel. You humans are even more stupid than we heard. Open fire. Kill them all. Every Kreth ship in the system turned their weapons toward the lone human vessel. Energy beams and missile salvos filled space as the entire enemy fleet focused their firepower on the Defiant. Evasive maneuvers. Morrison ordered calmly. Commander Blake's hands moved across his controls like he was playing a musical instrument. The Defiant twisted and rolled through space, dodging between energy beams with impossible precision.
Where?
The ship had been a second before. Explosions lit up the darkness. The Federation observers were pressed against their seats by the violent maneuvers. Telsoth was making sounds that might have been prayers in the Mindery language. Crew worked with calm efficiency, like this was just another training exercise. "Return fire," Morrison commanded. The Defiant's main guns opened up, targeting the closest Kreth destroyer. Gassed, the human weapons were different from anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of the clean energy beams most species used, they fired streams of superheated plasma that cut through enemy shields like they weren't there. The Kreth destroyer exploded in a ball of fire and debris. The rest of the enemy fleet paused for a moment, surprised that their prey was fighting back. "Blake, take us into the formation. I want to be too close for them to use their heavy weapons." The Defiant dove toward the enemy fleet like a hawk attacking. A flock of birds. Blake threaded the ship between two battlecruisers, using their own bulk to shield the human vessel from the weapons of other ships. "Hayes, target their engine sections. I want them disabled, not destroyed." "Why not just kill them, Captain?" Morrison watched the tactical display as more Kreth ships moved to intercept them. "Because I want survivors. I want them to tell their friends what happened here." Sergeant Hayes grinned and adjusted his targeting systems. His next shots were surgical strikes that took out the main engines of 3 enemy cruisers without destroying the ships completely. The disabled vessels drifted helplessly, no longer able to maneuver or retreat. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildup from the planet," Park reported. "The Kreth are charging their ground bombardment weapons. Air. Going to sterilize the surface." Morrison felt his blood turn cold. The Kreth were going to kill every living thing on Zalari Prime, rather than let the humans interfere with their conquest. "Blake, new course. Take us down to the planet. Maximum speed." "Sir, that means flying through their entire fleet. Ben, we better fly fast." The Defiant turned toward Zalari Prime and accelerated. Blake pushed the engines past their safety limits, racing against time and the charging weapons of the enemy bombardment ships. The Kreth fleet tried to intercept them, but the human ship was moving too fast and changing direction too often. Blake flew like the ship was an extension of his own body, rolling and diving through a maze of enemy fire. 30 seconds to atmosphere," Blake called out. Morrison could see the planet growing larger on the view screen. It was beautiful, covered in blue oceans and green continents, but he could also see the dark smoke rising from burning cities. "Park, target those bombardment ships. Take them out." "Sir, they're heavily shielded. It'll take multiple hits to penetrate their armor, and hit them multiple times." Park's fingers danced across her weapons console. The Defiant's guns fired again and again, pouring energy into the shields of the enemy bombardment vessels. By one, their defensive systems overloaded and failed. The first bombardment ship exploded just as it was preparing to fire on a Zalari city. The second died a moment later, its weapons array turning into molten metal. The third tried to turn away, but Park's targeting was too accurate. "Entering atmosphere," Blake announced. The Defiant dropped through the clouds of Zalari Prime like a falling star. Below them, Morrison could see the devastation the Kreth had caused. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble, forests burned with unnatural fires, but there were still signs of life, still people to save. "Sir, I'm detecting Zalari life signs in the mountain caves." "About 50 kilometers east," Dr. Stone reported from her medical sensors. "Blake, set us down near those caves. Cape scanning for Kreth ground forces." The ship landed in a clearing between 2 mountains. As soon as they touched down, Morrison could hear weapons fire in the distance. The Kreth were still hunting for survivors. "Hayes, Stone, you're with me. We're going to get those people out of the caves. Park, you and Blake hold the ship. Keep our escape route open." Morrison grabbed his weapon and headed for the airlock. Hayes was right behind him, carrying a backpack full of his special surprises. Dr. Stone had her medical kit and a sidearm that she knew how to use. The surface of Zalari Prime was a nightmare. The air smelled of smoke and death. In the distance, they could see the shapes of Kreth hunters moving through the ruins of what had once been a peaceful city. The caves were 3 kilometers away through rough terrain. Morrison and his team moved, carefully staying in cover and avoiding the enemy patrols. The Kreth were good hunters, but they were used to tracking frightened civilians. They weren't expecting trained soldiers. They reached the cave entrance just as a group of Kreth warriors was setting up drilling equipment to break through the sealed entrance. There were 6 of them, each over 2 meters tall and covered in natural armor plates. Morrison signaled his team to spread out. Hayes moved to the left, Stone to the right. They had done this kind of operation dozens of times during the wars on Earth. The attack was over in seconds. Morrison's plasma rifle cut down the first Kreth before they knew they were under attack. Hayes took out the third with a perfectly placed shot to the neck joint where the armor was weakest. Stone, moving with the cold precision of a battlefield medic, disabled the fourth with a neural disruptor. The last 2 Kreth tried to fight back, but they were used to hunting defenseless prey. They had never faced humans who shot first and asked questions later. "Hayes, can you get through that barrier?" Morrison asked, pointing to the sealed cave entrance. "No problem, Captain." Hayes pulled out one of his modified charges and placed it carefully against the rock. Should open it up without bringing down the whole cave system. The explosion was controlled and precise. When the smoke cleared, there was a neat opening in the cave wall. From inside came the sound of voices. Speaking in the musical language of the Zalari, Dr. Stone called out in standard Galactic, using the universal translator. "We're here to help. We're from Earth. You're safe now." The first Zalari to emerge was an elderly female with silver skin and large, gentle eyes. She looked at Morrison and his team with wonder and fear. "You're the humans from the message," she said softly. "You really came." Morrison nodded. "We came. We're going to get you out of here." Behind the elderly female came more Zalari. Families with children, artists carrying precious artwork, healers supporting the wounded. All of them had the same expression of disbelief that anyone had come to save them. "How many people are in there?" Stone asked, already checking the wounded. 437, the elderly Zalari replied. "We are all that remain of the city of Harmony Falls." Morrison looked at the crowd of survivors. His ship could carry maybe 50 people safely. There were hundreds here. They're somewhere above. Them, the Kreth fleet, was still fighting the Defiant. How long before they send more hunting parties? The sergeant was scanning the horizon with his rifle scope. "I count 3 more groups moving this way, maybe 20 minutes before they get here." Morrison made his decision. Couldn't save everyone at once, but they could start. And every life they saved was a victory against the monsters who thought mercy was weakness. "Stone, take the wounded and the children first. Get them to the ship. Hayes and I will hold this position until you get back." Dr. Stone nodded and began organizing. The evacuation. The Zalari moved with quiet efficiency, helping each other despite their own fear and exhaustion. Morrison watched them go and felt something cold settle in his chest. The Kreth thought they were dealing with another weak species. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first group of wounded Zalarian children were halfway to the Defiant when Morrison heard the sound of enemy engines approaching. 3 Kreth hunting ships were coming in low and fast, their weapons already charging for another attack on the cave system. "Hayes, can you take out those ships?" Sergeant Hayes looked up from the explosives he was planting around the cave entrance. "Not with small arms, Captain, but I've got an idea." He pulled out one of his modified charges and attached it to a piece of Kreth drilling equipment. "If I can get this close enough to one of those ships, ... Morrison understood immediately. "Do it. I'll cover you." Hayes grabbed the modified charge and sprinted toward the approaching ships. The Kreth hunters were focused on the cave entrance and didn't see him coming until it was too late. He threw the device at the nearest ship just as it was landing. The explosion tore the Kreth ship in half and sent debris flying into the second vessel. Both ships crashed in balls of fire and twisted metal. The third ship tried to retreat, but Morrison's plasma rifle found its engine compartment, crashed into the mountainside with a sound like thunder. Dr. Stone's voice came through his communicator. "First group is aboard the ship, Captain. Coming back for more." Morrison looked at the remaining Zalari survivors. There were still over 300 people waiting to be evacuated. Okay, at this rate, it would take hours to get them all to safety. Hours they didn't have. Hayes set up a defensive perimeter. More hunting parties will be coming. The sergeant was already moving, placing his modified charges in strategic positions around the cave entrance. Each device was motion activated. It's designed to take out enemy soldiers who got too close. The next wave of Kreth hunters arrived 20 minutes later. This time there were 2 full squads, 24 warriors armed with heavy weapons. They came expecting to find defenseless civilians hiding in caves instead. They found Hayes' surprises. The first explosive went off when the lead Kreth warrior stepped on a concealed trigger. The blast took out 5 enemies and scattered the rest. The second charge detonated when they tried to take cover behind a large rock. The third went off when they attempted to flank around the cave entrance. Within minutes, 24 Kreth hunters had been reduced to 6 confused and terrified survivors. Morrison and Hayes finished the job with precise rifle fire. Captain Hayes said, reloading his weapon. I'm starting to think these guys aren't as tough as their reputation suggests. Morrison had been thinking the same thing. The Kreth were physically strong and well-armed, but they fought like bullies who had never faced real resistance. They relied on fear and overwhelming numbers instead of actual tactics. Dr. Stone returned, with an empty transport shuttle, just as another group of Zalari was ready to go. This time she took the elderly and the injured, people who couldn't fight if the situation got worse. How many more trips? Morrison asked. At least 4 more, maybe 5. Captain, some of these people are badly hurt and need real medical treatment. Soon, Morrison nodded and checked his ammunition. They were holding their position but barely. Sooner or later, the Kreth would send enough troops to overwhelm their defenses. His communicator crackled with Commander Blake's voice from orbit. Captain, we've got problems up here. The Kreth fleet is regrouping. They're bringing their heavy ships to bear on our position. Morrison looked up at the sky. He couldn't see the space battle, but he could hear the sound of the Defiant's engines. Straining under combat stress, how long can you hold them off? Not much longer, sir. Lieutenant Park has done amazing work, but we're outnumbered 200-1. We need to wrap this up soon. Morrison made a decision that surprised even himself. Blake, send down the Federation observers. Sir, you heard me? Send down Telsoth and the other Federation representatives. Want them to see what's happening. Here. 20 minutes later, Mindari observer Telsoth and 2 other Federation officials landed near the cave system in an emergency shuttle. They emerged looking confused and terrified. Captain Morrison, why have you brought us to this dangerous location? Telsoth asked, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. Morrison pointed to the Zalari survivors waiting to be evacuated. I want you to see who we're fighting for. I want you to understand what the Kreth do to peaceful species. The Federation observers looked around at the destruction. Burned cities in the distance, smoking craters where homes had once stood, the bodies of Kreth hunters who had died trying to murder civilians hiding in caves. This is what your council decided wasn't worth fighting for, Morrison continued. These people, these children. The Kreth were going to kill every living thing on this planet, and you calculated it was too risky to intervene. One of the observers, a crystalline Vorthok named Zentha, examined the remains of a Kreth weapon. Captain, these hunters were equipped with devices designed for torturing prisoners. This was not a military operation. This was genocide for entertainment. Morrison nodded grimly. Now you're starting to understand. Dr. Stone returned for a group of evacuees. This time, some of the younger Zalari males had volunteered to help defend the cave entrance. They had no weapons and no training, but they refused to leave while their families were still in danger. Captain, one of them said through the universal translator, we want to fight. We cannot hide while our children are threatened. Morrison looked at the young Zalari. They were artists and healers who had never harmed anyone in their lives, but they were willing to stand and fight when their loved ones were in danger. Hayes, give them whatever weapons you can spare. The sergeant handed out sidearms and gave the Zalari volunteers a quick lesson in basic combat tactics. They learned fast, driven by desperation and protective instincts that transcended species. The next Kreth attack came an hour later. This time, it was a full company, over 60 warriors with heavy weapons and armored support vehicles. They expected to overwhelm the human defenders through sheer numbers. They hadn't counted on fighting. Alongside people who had nothing left to lose, the battle was fierce but short. Morrison and Hayes used their military training to direct the defense, while the Zalari volunteers fought with the desperate courage of parents protecting their children. Dr. Stone moved through the battlefield like a ghost, treating wounded allies and taking down enemies with equal efficiency. When the smoke cleared, 60 Kreth warriors had been reduced to scattered survivors who fled back to their ships. The human defenders had taken casualties, but they held their ground. Telsoth watched the aftermath of the battle with obvious shock. "Captain Morrison, I have never seen anything like this. The Zalari fought alongside you against trained warriors. That's what happens when you give people hope," Morrison replied. "The Federation told them they were going to die, so they gave up. We told them they could live, so they fought." Dr. Stone had evacuated all but the last 50 Zalari when Morrison's communicator crackled with an urgent message from orbit. "Captain, this is Blake. We've got incoming. War Leader Thax is bringing his personal command ship down to the surface. It's a heavy assault vessel with enough firepower to level this entire mountain range." Morrison looked at the remaining survivors, so close to saving them all, and now the enemy commander was coming to finish the job personally. "How long until he arrives?" 20 minutes, sir, and Captain. What? He's broadcasting on all frequencies. He wants to challenge you to single combat. Winner takes the planet. Morrison considered this. Thax was probably twice his size and had been fighting for centuries. It would be suicide to face him alone. But it might buy enough time to evacuate the last of the survivors. "Tell him I accept his challenge," Morrison said, "but I have conditions." The response came back quickly. War Leader Thax's voice was filled with confidence and amusement. "What conditions do you dare make, human?" Morrison smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You want to understand what you're really fighting? Come down to the surface. See Earth through my eyes. Then we'll talk about single combat." There was silence for a long moment. Then Thax's laughter echoed across the communication channel. "Very well, human. I'll see this violent world that produced such arrogant creatures. Then I will kill you slowly, as an example to others who might oppose the Kreth Dominion." Morrison cut the transmission and turned to his team. "Hayes, Stone, get the last of the survivors to the ship. This ends now." Telsoth was staring at him, with something that might have been respect. "Captain, you cannot seriously be considering single combat with a Kreth war leader. He has killed hundreds of enemy champions." Morrison checked his weapons one last time. "Maybe, but he's never fought a human before." War Leader Thax arrived exactly 20 minutes later in a massive assault ship that blocked out the sun. The vessel was 3 times the size of the Defiant and covered in weapons that could destroy a city. It landed with a thunderous crash that shook the entire mountain range. Morrison stood alone in the clearing between the caves and the enemy ship. His team had evacuated the last of the Zalari survivors, but they remained hidden nearby, ready to provide support if needed. The Federation observers watched from a safe distance. Recording everything for their reports, the assault ship's main ramp lowered with mechanical precision. War Leader Thax emerged slowly, savoring the moment. He was exactly what Morrison had expected. Over 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor plates that looked like black metal, 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to cut steel. His face was a nightmare of fangs and glowing red eyes. "So you are the human who dares challenge the Kreth Dominion," Thax said, his voice like grinding stone. "You are smaller than I expected." Morrison didn't reply. Instead, he activated a holographic projector that Hayes had rigged up from spare parts. Images began playing in the air between them. Earth's history compressed into a few minutes of horror. The first image was ancient. Human warriors with bronze weapons, standing over the bodies of their enemies. Then iron weapons, steel, gunpowder. Each image showed humanity perfecting the art of killing their own species. "What is this?" Thax demanded. "This is where I come from," Morrison said calmly. This is Earth. The images continued. The Roman Colosseum, where humans killed each other for entertainment. Medieval battlefields where knights fought in armor that made Kreth natural plating look fragile. The trenches of World War I, where humans used poison gas against their own species. Thax was no longer laughing. The images showed a level of violence that even the Kreth found disturbing. Humans hadn't just perfected warfare against other species. They'd spent thousands of years learning how to kill each other. You see, Thax? You made a mistake, Morrison continued. You think the Zalari are weak because they're peaceful? We think the Federation is weak because they prefer diplomacy. But you've never faced a species that learned violence the way we did. The hologram showed more recent conflicts. Tank battles from World War II, nuclear weapons that could destroy entire cities, special forces operations where small teams of humans took out enemy bases through pure skill and determination. Every human child learns about these wars in school, Morrison explained. We study the tactics. We memorize the battles. We honor the soldiers who died fighting monsters just like you. War leader Thax stepped back, his confidence shaken. But your species fights its own kind. That proves you are chaotic and unfit for civilization. Morrison smiled, but his eyes remained cold. No, Thax, it proves we're really, really good at fighting. Hologram showed the final image. Earth from space, beautiful and blue and green. Then it zoomed in to show the peaceful cities, the children playing in parks, the families living normal lives. This is what all that violence protected, Morrison said. This is what we fought for, the right to be peaceful when we choose to be. But when someone threatens innocent people, we remember how to be monsters. Thax raised his primary weapon, a plasma cannon designed to cut through starship armor. Enough talk, human. Let us see how well your species fights when faced with real warriors. Morrison drew his sidearm. It looked tiny compared to Thax's massive weapon. The Federation observers probably thought he had lost his mind. The war leader fired first. His plasma blast carved a crater in the ground where Morrison had been standing. But the human captain was no longer there. It rolled to the side and come up firing. His shots aimed at the joints in Thax's armor where Dr. Stone had told him they would be most effective. The battle was faster and more brutal than anything the observers had ever seen. Thax was strong and experienced, but Morrison fought like something from the war leader's nightmares. He used the terrain, the lighting, even the smoke from weapon impacts to his advantage. When Thax charged with his claws extended, Morrison didn't retreat. He stepped inside the alien's reach and used a combat knife to target nerve clusters that Stone had identified in the Kreth anatomy. When the war leader tried to grab him, Morrison slipped away like smoke and struck from a different angle. You fight like a coward, Thax snarled, bleeding from a dozen small wounds. I fight like a human, Morrison replied, circling his opponent. We don't care about honor or tradition. We care about winning. The turning point came when Thax made the mistake of trying to intimidate Morrison with a display of raw strength. He grabbed a boulder the size of a transport vehicle and hurled it at the human captain. Morrison didn't try to dodge. Instead, he used one of Hayes's remaining explosives to turn the boulder into fragments that showered down on Thax himself. While the war leader was blinded by dust and debris, Morrison moved in for the kill. The fight ended with Morrison's knife buried in the nerve cluster at the base of Thax's skull. The massive alien warrior collapsed like a fallen tree, paralyzed but still alive. Morrison stood over his defeated enemy, breathing hard but victorious. Around the clearing, Kreth soldiers emerged from the assault ship, their weapons trained on the human captain, but they didn't fire. Their leader had been defeated in single combat according to their own traditions. The human wins, one of them announced in their harsh language. By the laws of the Dominion, this world is his. Morrison looked up at the Kreth soldiers. I don't want your world. I want you to leave this system and never come back. I want you to spread the word about what happened here. The Kreth's second in command, a female warrior named Grathka, stepped forward. What word should we spread, human? Morrison pointed to the Federation observers who had recorded everything. Tell everyone in the galaxy that Earth has joined the Federation. Tell them that humans protect the innocent. and tell them that anyone who hurts peaceful species will answer to us." Grathka looked at her defeated leader, then at the human who had brought down the most feared warrior in the Dominion. "It will be done. The Kreth will remember this day." The enemy forces withdrew within hours, taking their defeated war leader. With them, their fleet left the Zalari system and never returned. Within days, reports spread throughout the galaxy about the humans who had defeated the unconquerable. Kreth Dominion Morrison found himself surrounded by grateful Zalari survivors. As they began the work of rebuilding their world, the Federation observers sent reports that changed everything the galaxy thought they knew about humanity. Telsoth approached Morrison as the Defiant prepared to depart. "Captain, the Federation Council wishes to offer Earth full membership immediately. They also wanted to discuss mutual defense treaties." Morrison nodded. "Tell them we'll consider it. Make sure they understand something first." "What is that?" "Humans don't fight for conquest or glory. We fight for people who can't fight for themselves. Anyone who threatens innocent civilians. We'll find out exactly what kind of monsters Earth can produce." The Mindari observer's tentacles writhed with what might have been respect. "And if the Federation needs help against other threats?" Morrison looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, other predators were watching and waiting. Then they should remember that when someone cries for help, Earth answers, and we don't send diplomats. For 6 months later, the galaxy was a different place. Peaceful species that had lived in fear for centuries began to feel safe again. Predatory civilizations found their expansion stopped by humans, who refused to let innocent people suffer. The Kreth Dominion itself began to change. Without the aura of invincibility that had sustained them for 1,000 years, their empire started to crumble. Some of their former victims even began fighting back, inspired by the example of the humans who had shown them that monsters could be defeated. Captain Morrison returned to Earth orbit to find representatives from dozens of species waiting to meet with humanity's leaders. Some wanted protection. Others wanted to learn how humans fought so effectively. All of them had heard the story of the Defiant and her crew, the Federation. Council offered Morrison any command he wanted in their combined fleet. He turned them down. The Defiant was his ship, and his crew were the people he trusted to answer the next distress call. Because somewhere in the galaxy, there were always innocent people crying for help. And as long as humans could hear those cries, the monsters of the universe would never sleep peacefully again. Morrison stood on his bridge, looking out at the stars, and smiled. Earth had found its place in the galaxy not as explorers or merchants, or diplomats, but as the guardians that civilized species called when civilization itself was threatened. The galaxy had wanted to know what kind of creatures humanity really was. Now they knew. When evil raised its head, when innocent people suffered, when the darkness threatened to swallow the light, Earth sent its monsters to fight back, and humanity's monsters were very, very good at their job.